If I'm pulling plastic sheeting out, things must be about to get messy. That would be a total understatement with what's about to happen in 2 days from now. But tonight is all about getting the boat a little bit more cleaned up. Not a little bit more cleaned up, but really cleaned up to a point that this project can move forward. There's a lot of little foam stuff still stuck down on the floor in there that I just chipped away with. That stuff is drying out, but at the end of the day I want to have a nice, clean, dry surface to be working with. So I do want to do the best job I can getting all that foam out of there, even though it's tedious, and using the vacuum. And it's funny with this vacuum, it is definitely not an industrial vacuum. However, it's getting the job done, it's convenient, it sits there on the wall, I don't have to pick it up and put it down, so I'm super happy with that. Up underneath the gunnel, I really hadn't done a good enough job of getting everything bundled up and tight, and actually it was Luke's suggestion when he was over the other night that I just take all the wiring that was hanging down and put it into the bucket that I've got right there. So I'm wadding up all that wiring, I'm taping it off, I'm labeling it, and now it's in the bucket. Now that wiring's out of the way. Now I'm taking the throttle and transmission cable out. It was only 3 bolts, super easy to do. I probably should have done that right away. I just kind of wanted to leave as much in the boat as possible, but it really took no time at all to do that. Putting the plastic sheeting up, I worked as a painter for a few of the last 5 years, and learned that it's all in the prep work. So you got that good 3M 72-inch drop-down sheeting, super easy to put up. I'm walling off the front of the boat because I am going to attempt to grind off all of that glue that you see me kind of messing with there, that glue that's on top of the stringer. The glue that you can see that is only like that bright white in small sections, because that's the only spots that it was holding to the floor. So now as I'm looking at it, oh dear God, yeah, here's the next thing. Now as I'm thinking, the glue that is on top of there, that was factory glue that got put down, and then the floor just never quite sealed to it. So I think this boat may have been flawed from the beginning, and then that previous owner that did the repair that I'm now investigating, they just drilled into these floorboards and poured foam to fill the voids and just used that, I guess, to shore up this failing floorboard in the boat. And then they ran it and sold it to a grad student who was just psyched to get a really good deal on a ski boat. So that glue is, in some places, it's like 11 millimeters thick. It's really thick, and I chose to go at it with my grinder and a flapper bit, with a 36 grit flapper bit, which is a really gnarly tool when you're using it. Kind of fun, actually. In hindsight, and I'll figure this out in 3 days, so in the future I'm going to figure this out, but I should have just used my oscillating grinder tool, and there's a grout blade attachment that's perfect for plump grout, and it just turns out that this glue with that grout attachment would have just popped off, and I could have gotten all this glue off in chunks instead of this dust storm that I'm creating. Thank God for all the sheeting I put up. Even with all the sheeting, dust still got on my wife's car, a little bit on the camping equipment, which actually now have a double layer of protection over them. Here I was kind of getting smart. I took a small pry bar and started chipping glue off because it was being such a nightmare, but that little small pry bar just wasn't getting it done, so here I am back to the grinder. This was quite a night. Dirty, gross work. Enjoy it. At this point, I thought I was done grinding for the night, so I started vacuuming it up, and it was amazing how much dust was down on the floor. Yeah, here I'll pull and show. Look, I filled that bin just by cleaning up from the back of the boat to where I'm standing and a little bit over on the left side, and that just filled with dust immediately. So, I mean, it's slippery in there, it's hard to stand. I really made a mess. At this point, I got back to the grinding work because I realized that I wanted to clean off the side of the boat where I am going to fiberglass the floor back to when I get to that point. And I might as well just keep making the mess now versus clean it all up and then make another mess and have to clean it up again. So what I'm trying to do is right here, I'm trying to sand the gel coat and get down to fiberglass on that motor mount, that piece of floor that's left on the motor mount, because that's going to be really important to get a good seal of fiberglass there. The wonderful sound of sawzalling off a big chunk of fiberglass. So tonight I am doing my first real structural modification of the boat. This is the first kind of step in the whole engineering process. That large gray panel I have there is some marine board that I picked up, and I'm going to use that to wedge in there under that fiberglass that's there, sit on top of the stringer, and then shore up the floor between those two pieces. There's a really fortunate thing here. The stringer around the engine mounts drops down on the inside, so there's actually like an inch gap under the floor on the inside of the stringer. That means the outside of the stringer where I'm working now is up to where the floor is. And so what I did was I cut the outside of the stringer down to that inside of the stringer level. Now that's going to allow me to get the foam out and then build the flat part of the stringer that's that inch lower, maybe it's a little less than an inch, and then put my marine board, that big chunk of gray there, in on top of it, fiberglass it all into that, get all sealed in with a thickened epoxy resin and a bunch of other crazy stuff that I've heard on YouTube. Get it all in there, just load it up with stuff and seal it all together. Here I'm using these long paint sticks that I have with some sandpaper on and just trying to get it underneath there because I can barely get my fingers in there to do any sanding. So to get that good and clean, it's going to be super difficult. So I really just made that notch tonight, just about 40 inches of work and all this cleanup. I mean, that's one night worth of work on a boat project. The pace of this thing is kind of wearing on me a little bit. I knew it would be slower than expected, but this is kind of ridiculous. So there it is. I put the panel in. You see how it's going to sit there. It's actually going to move a little bit to the left, but that's a whole round of engineering that I have no idea about, and I'll just wait to another day, which is actually why I'm here in the other side of the garage working on the floor panel that I lifted out. I'm not quite ready to move forward. I don't quite have my plan together in regard to cutting the stringers open and pulling the foam out and replacing the foam. Now this is the future that I was talking about earlier, where I use the grout blade on the little oscillator, and I'm just ripping up stuff off the top of the floor, like the old holes where they put the foam in. There was epoxy on top of those, and epoxy and fiberglass, and I was able to chip most of that off. And any spot where the carpet was still held down with the glue, I could just scrape that off in one move versus grinding it all the way down and just dump it onto the floor. Look at the pile of junk on the floor compared to the sander work. One thing here, I'm using a 150 grit disc, and that is just way too fine of a grit. Like the guys on YouTube are always talking like 36 grit. They're jogging between 40 grit and 36 grit. And I always think they're being ridiculous, but boy oh boy, do you need a heavy grip for this stuff. You can go at it way harder than I expected. So I will be going to Home Depot and getting the heavier grit discs, because you can see this is just a labor intensive thing. Now, why am I trying to take this down to smooth all the way through? I want this floorboard to be perfectly flat. I want to line the boat with sea deck. Now, most ski boats are covered in carpet, and what I found out is the carpet kind of masks some of this stuff. So when they did that foaming, which is kind of the same way I'm going to foam this, they can just fiberglass over those holes, leave a little bump, and the carpet masks it. But because I want to use sea deck, I need to bevel into those holes with the sander eventually, pour the foam, and then cut the foam out, and then lay fiberglass into those dimples and then smooth it perfectly flat. That way when the sea deck goes down, it's on a perfectly flat surface. You're not feeling those little dimples in the floor. So adding a ton of work for myself, but I want this boat to be super pimped. So because I'm doing the work, I don't want to cut any corners. I'm just going to go for it. So even though I was out there, 150 grit sandpaper, these are hours that just need to be killed. I just got to put the work in, get this done, because someday this work's going to have to be done. So while I'm thinking and not sure what I'm going to do on the next step inside the boat, this was a good place to kill some hours, get something done, feel accomplished, stare at the bottom, reaffirm that I have no idea what I'm doing, and live to work another day.